TikTok. Um, I'll explain to y'all why too in just a second. Let me set this up. Okay, so I should be live now on YouTube as well. So, as a lot of you guys know, Hillman Talk has apparently started to become shadow banned. Um, there are a lot of people that are either like not seeing our content anymore, or I guess I don't know if TikTok is starting to suppress the content. So I want to make sure that I have different avenues for people to be able to engage in the content, ask questions, be a part of our class. Um, Eventually, YouTube is going to let me live my life and do what it is that I need to do, but I'm streaming from both platforms. So if you see me look over here, it's because I'm on my laptop on YouTube. And then, of course, for the YouTube listeners, if you see me look this way, it's also because I'm on live on TikTok. But yeah, for those of you that are on TikTok who follow me or enrolled in the class and you're not seeing my content, I think the best way to make sure you don't miss anything is to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. It's linked in my bio, because in the event that not only we continue to be shadow banned, but if TikTok goes away, then the YouTube content will still be there. Okay, so we are on for an hour. I have to do a hard stop around 10 o'clock, y'all, because I still have content I got to create for you guys for the remainder of the week going into next week. But I am here if you guys have any questions on anything we talked about or covered in week one. If you guys just have questions in general for me, if there are things you guys want to talk about related to, what we're learning in race and rights, then this is what these office hours are for. Hi, choosing one. Are we going to be in Hillman TikTok for the Discord? Honestly, I don't really have any idea what the people who govern Hillman Talk are doing. To be quite honest, I really enjoy the concept of Hillman Talk in general, as far as a lot of us as creators, professionals, professors who have a lot of knowledge that we wanted to share and create a sense of community. I love the idea behind that. I'm still kind of struggling to understand the idea behind like creating Hillman Talk as an actual institution and trying to get it accredited. And then what they're doing with that. I know there's like a gap of communication as well, because I haven't heard anything from anybody who's supposed to be like governing the actual institution of Hillman Talk. So I'm not currently a part of the Discord. I haven't gotten any information about being a part of the Discord. My community they had orientate. I had no idea. And I know that I'm on the list of professors for this semester, but I think there might be a gap in communication with us versus the students, which I think is a little problematic. But for anyone who is interested in race and rights and just interested in the content, the content, you can follow me. And like I said, we'll be here on the YouTube Black and Briefed, and then I will still be on TikTok. Yes, you can share the link with me, but again, nobody from Hillman has reached out to me personally as a professor. And like I said, I'm still trying to figure out what it is that they're doing with that in general. Let's see if anybody put any questions in the TikTok thread. I don't see any. I hope you guys, yes, tomorrow's class actually will be 2 parts, because talking about the Reconstruction era, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and then the civil rights cases, it's a lot, okay? So tomorrow's class will actually be in 2 parts. Both parts, of course, will be posted here, right here on TikTok, and then here on YouTube as well. And like I said, the YouTube is probably the best place for us to house the content, so that if TikTok goes away, which honestly, y'all, it looks like a real possibility, that come April, TikTok will be no more, at least not the way that we currently know it. And then also, apparently, TikTok is shadow banning the content anyway. So it'll still be housed on YouTube, and you guys won't have to worry about finding me or anything like that if you're subscribed. If you subscribe on YouTube, make sure that you click the notification bell. That way, whenever I post, you'll get a notification that shows that there's a new video or a new live available. Okay. But yes, it'll be in two parts. The first part will be specific to the Dred Scott case, which kind of ushered in the beginning of the Civil War and the Reconstruction era that followed. And then the second one will focus on the impact and legacy of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So those will both drop tomorrow. And then, of course, on Thursday, we'll cover the civil rights cases, including Brown v. Board of Education, which is a huge case. Yes. It'll also be posted in two parts on the Black and Briefed YouTube as well. Okay. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. This is content that is kind of deep, right? A lot of legal jargon. I know when I was in law school, I had to read the full cases, right? And these Supreme Court cases can sometimes be hundreds of pages long because you have what's called the majority opinion, which is the majority of justices that sided one way, they write what's called a majority opinion. And then you can have concurrent opinions, which is like where a judge doesn't disagree with the majority opinion, but like they would have done it a different way, but it's basically them agreeing. And then there are dissenting opinions, which is, the justices that did not agree with the majority, and they will write their own opinion and support, why they didn't think that the court should rule in that way. And so sometimes these cases are hundreds of pages. And especially if you're reading the ones that were in the very beginning days of the Constitution and the Supreme Court, the 17 and 1800s, and even some of the early 1900 cases, it's written in Old English. It's horrible, right? So I had to figure out a way to make it digestible for you guys and easy to understand. And that is sometimes a little difficult. So I hope that you guys have been enjoying it so far and that you're getting something out of it. Okay. Yes, I love the comment. Thank you, Tan. I appreciate that. So like I said, do you guys have any questions about week one's materials? I know in our first class, we talked about the origins of the Constitution, the 3/5 compromise. We talked about the link between American independence and the Haitian Revolution. And then, of course, we talked about the separation of powers and checks and balances, which I know is pretty controversial considering everything that's going on right now. It's cool. I still Google it. Yes. The law is full of really, really big words, really, really big words because people like to sound smart, right? So they'll use really, really big words and a lot of jargon. And it's like, you could have just said that a simpler way. France and Napoleon, can you briefly go over that? Yes. Great question. I'm going to try to put you guys a little closer to my laptop so it looks like I'm looking in the same direction. Okay, so the question is, France and Napoleon, can you briefly go over that? And why does Haiti still owe France? Absolutely. So the French Revolution started pretty much similarly to what we see going on now in the United States. There was oligarchy where the royalty, the people who had money, were essentially running the government. And it put everyone else in a state of utter destitution. So if you can imagine, like in the medieval ages, what that would feel like. I mean, it feels horrible right now with what we're going through, but can you imagine what it would feel like in those times? So essentially, the people rose up and rebelled and killed a lot of the bourgeoisie, that is what they were called, and started the French Revolution. They ultimately ended up executing the king, right? Which was a huge step. At that point in time, Saint-Domingue, which is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti, it was all one peninsula called Saint-Domingue. Saint-Domingue was a French colony, similar to how the Americas, the North America, the original colonies were colonized by the British. That's how Saint Domingue was. Um, what the Haitian Revolution essentially was when the people of France rose up against the oligarchy. They created their own Declaration of Independence, which talked about life and liberty and brotherhood. And the main difference between slaves in the Caribbean versus slaves here in America outside of generational slavery is that those slave masters allowed their slaves to learn how to read and write and to retain a lot of their cultural heritage from whatever parts of Africa or tribes of Africa they came from. So the slaves, some of them did have the ability to read and to write. And word traveled fast about this overthrow of the bourgeoisie in France and the creation of this Declaration of Independence that talked about life, liberty, and brotherhood. And the slaves realized very quickly, wait a minute, we're not a part of that. And that is a problem. And so they started to revolt. Now, Toussaint Louverture was actually I guess what you can consider like Black bourgeoisie. He was technically free. He was educated, well educated, but he was a warrior, right? And so he ended up building up a faction in Haiti and driving a lot of what we know as the Haitian Revolution. The Haitians were free, right? So the enslaved Black people in Haiti were free at the time. But as you could imagine, right, like they had to establish their own form of government and then they had to establish their own economy for themselves. The problem is that they were slaves. And the main crop that is grown in the islands is sugarcane. Sugarcane was the mainstay of money at the time. Um, and the only way to harvest sugarcane is to get on in the fields and chop them down, which is not easy work. And so Toussaint Louverture wanted some people to go back in the fields, and they were like, no, we're not doing that. So there were some challenges in Saint Domingue already. When Napoleon Bonaparte came to power in France, he took over parts of Africa, in Egypt, and then he came back to France. And at that time, the newly freed Black people in Saint Domingue wanted to be recognized as a nation. And Napoleon Bonaparte was like, nah, we're not doing that. And I'm actually tired of hearing you guys talk about freedom. So because he had conquered so much of Europe and parts of Africa, now he wanted to come over to the Americas and conquer there as well. And part of his plan was to control three major port cities within the Caribbean. So there's Port-au-Prince, which is what we know as the capital of Haiti, the Port of New Orleans, which was French owned at the time. It was not a part of North America, or it wasn't a part of the United States at the time. And then I believe it was the Panama Canal. So it would create this trifecta of trade that would make France the dominating nation and empire at that time. Well, when the Haitian people overthrew Napoleon Bonaparte, he lost Port-au-Prince. And in his mind, because it kind of ruined his plan, he had no need for Louisiana and no need for the Port of New Orleans anymore. So he negotiated the sale of Louisiana to North America, to United States, and that is what became the Louisiana Purchase. Now, the Louisiana Purchase was a pretty controversial moment because then the then existing colonies had to figure out, well, is slavery going to move westward since we have more land? What does that look like? Remember that at the time, they were trying to control the North and the South's government influence. And so the fear was that if slavery moved westward and there were more colonies created westward, that the South would reign supreme, right? And then the South also wanted to make sure that, hey, we have this huge number of people that are not considered people, they can't vote, so it actually dampers our ability to make decisions in government. We want them to count for something. Now, they're not citizens. They're not citizens. They don't have the same rights as us, but we want them to count so that we feel like there's adequate representation for the Southern slave-owning states. And that's where all of that comes from. Why does Haiti still owe France? Because, again, their government system and their economy was destroyed. And so, what pretty much the big three conquistadors, Spain, France, and England, what they created was the World Bank. And the World Bank has arguably bankrupted most of these island nations. Jamaica is included as well. So, what ended up happening was that they instituted a lot of fines against Haiti. Haiti had to borrow some money over the years to help to stabilize their economy, but also even after they drove out the French, there were still Americans who lived in Haiti and visited Haiti. There were also Spanish that came, and that's where that separation between the Dominican Republic and Haiti started. And then there were English that came as well, and they all have the same priorities. So essentially, when they created the World Bank, Haiti took out a lot of loans at very high interest rates, and it essentially bankrupted the island, along with what I would call the stealing of a lot of their trade. So, bauxite, which is used to create steel, sugar, milk. I know that tourism is very heavy in the Caribbean as well, but a lot of them, a lot of these islands still struggle to this day because of that. And I think that those are the remnants of white supremacy that you see. And Haiti, unfortunately, to have been the first independent Black nation in the Americas, they've suffered greatly still at the hands of their original oppressors. So it's actually sad to think about, but um, all wrongs get righted at some point. But that was a great question. YouTube about the three branches was a good refresher. Thank you so much. Yes. And I think that we need that refresher in this moment in time when there's so much that's going on and you feel like you don't have any control over it. You absolutely do. And it's a good reminder that some of the things that we see happening cannot actually happen because of the way our government is set up. But again, when you have control of a narrative and you can make people think like, oh, I can do whatever I want, and people don't take the time to educate themselves, you'll just find that you can trample all over them, right? Were the bank bonds able to really pay for the Louisiana purchase? Yeah, I think I want to say that that was about a $10 million purchase when the United States acquired all of that land. From what I understood was that the bank. Yes, I mean a lot of this is promissory notes, but I also think that there was some trade in as far as like crops as well. And then, like I said, I do believe that was a $10 million purchase. Is that why much of Louisiana law is based in French? Probably. That is where we see a lot of what we call Creole culture, but that is a mix of French, African, whatever traditional African roots and traditions and culture was brought over by the slaves that inhabited that area. There's some Spanish there as well. Because remember, these are the three major empires at the time, right? These are the three major countries that are going around conquering lands that already existed. So there's major influence in most of the Americas by all three of these countries. And that's where you see the mix. You have Creole, you can even taste it in their food when you go to Louisiana, the way that they season food, the way they cook food, the culture, absolutely, the accent, the very clear accent, it comes from all of that, that mix, that melting pot of culture. Taxes on the bank, that is McCullough v. Maryland, absolutely. So the McCullough v. Maryland case was where you saw the federal government try to establish the first national bank. And again, like I said at the time, while it was the United States of America, every state was functioning like its own country. So Maryland did not like the idea that there was going to be this federal bank. And in the attempt to try to end it, they implemented a tax. McCullough, who was the teller of the National Bank, refused to pay the tax. And so they sued him, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court was like, no, states don't get to tell the federal government what to do. They also don't get to restrict rights that are given by the federal government from their citizens. They don't get to restrict them. They can increase the amount of rights that the citizens of their states get, but they can't restrict the amount of rights that the federal government gives. And then also, it basically stands for the fact that Congress can decide what laws are enacted and then can do what is needed to make sure that those laws are enacted as well. What about the Dutch? I'm not familiar with Dutch influence in the Americas as far as being conquistadors. I know for the United States and for much of the Caribbean, most of the conquests were done by the Spanish, the French, and the English. But I'm sure if I did a little bit more digging, I could find out more on that. But most of the influence when we talk about the creation of our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, there's a very heavy link between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And there were also soldiers that came to assist from those other countries to fight in the American Revolution as well. So it's a very interesting link, and especially the link between the Haitian Revolution and the formation of the Constitution and what we now know as Louisiana and all of those states as well. There's a very direct link between the start of the first Black independent nation and what happened here. There was also a very clear fear from American slave masters that what was happening in France, or not, excuse me, what was happening in Haiti with the French would trickle over into the United States and have a direct impact on slaves there. This is around the time when you see slavery become a lot more brutal in the United States because they wanted to ensure that people were so intimidated that they would not revolt. There are actually stories from English slave masters and French slave masters and Spanish slave masters who visited North America, who visited the United States and talked about, if you would believe it, how brutal the slavery and the slave conditions were in the United States versus their colonies. Once again, I think it's very interesting because where did the American slave masters learn it from? Right. But there are some very distinct differences. And again, the United States is one of the only places where you see generational slavery. And then you see systemic racism in every single facet of American culture and society that continues to perpetuate that level of oppression. Okay, great questions. Okay, I don't see any questions in YouTube. Taking a look at the syllabus for those of you that have it, do you guys even have any questions on what we'll be covering this week? This week is pretty hefty, right? But this will probably be a little bit more familiar to you guys. Do you guys have any questions on anything that we're going to review this week? Don't see any. I don't see any on YouTube. I can't get the The syllabus is in the link tree in my bio. There will be a copy of the syllabus there. I can't get the PDF. That is not good because that PBS migration, the PBS video is really good. Let me make sure I can pull it up myself still. Okay. I've watched 13th and Amend. Those are actually, but I actually went back and watched 13 this weekend. How should those be watched? I think that you watch them for, I think, a better hands-on understanding. I know that 13th is really good to tie in the loophole in the 13th Amendment and how that loophole created what we now know as the prison industrial complex. I think it's really, really disturbing. I think it's disturbing to even see these like big like conglomerates of corporations that make money off of what is now modern day slavery. I think it was so interesting to hear some of the companies and brands that profit off of prison labor. Idaho potatoes; those are those are potatoes that are harvested by imprisoned people and they don't get paid for it. And that the 13th Amendment deliberately leaves that loophole. Um, I think that that documentary really kind of brings that to life. Also, if you guys have a copy of the new Jim Crow, it goes into a deeper understanding of how um, the backlash against Black people getting rights in this country was so severe that it created the mass incarceration. To see the numbers even skyrocket the way that they did. I know that people started having like a real awakening as well when Hillary Clinton was running for office of how the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton specifically, who I know a lot of Black people like to joke and credit as the first Black president, how he created the mass issue that we see today of mass incarceration of Black men. Obviously, the role that Reagan played as well, he took a huge role in not only the crack epidemic, but also how drugs were criminalized in this country and drug use is criminalized in this country. It's an eye-opening documentary. Amend is also very good as well. I think Amend is not as sad in its approach, and Amend also more so focuses on the 14th Amendment and the idea of birthright citizenship that we see even playing out right now, right? But both of those are great documentaries to watch just to get a better understanding. And I think that it brings in some more like modern day issues with also giving you like the historical standpoint of like why the law was created the way that it did, how it was originally implemented, and things like that. Yeah, incarceration for profit is despicable. And it's definitely, I think, a way that has re-legalized slavery, and it's just not called that. What I also want you guys to think about too, as we're going into another election cycle, number one, I absolutely want you guys to pay attention. I don't know where everyone is from, but there are three special elections that are getting ready to happen within the next few months. Two of them are for congressional seats in Florida. One of them is for a congressional seat out of New Jersey. If the Democrats are able to fill all three seats, they will take away the simple majority from the Republicans in the House of Representatives, which is extremely important. Okay. But the reason why I bring this to your attention is because there is a website called Open Secrets. Open Secrets allows you to see where companies funnel money into politics. There is a lot of corporate money in the political system here in America. Um, and I think that we need to be aware of where our money is going when we're supporting certain businesses. Um, 13 again is an eye-opening documentary because it will show you the vast amount of major corporations who profit off of and invest into mass incarceration of disproportionate amounts of Black bodies, Black male bodies at that. Um, and so I think that especially as we continue to explore boycotts as a method of protest, they are one of the most effective means of civil disobedience because, of course, everyone is about the money and their bottom line. But I think that it's really good to pay attention to what these corporations are investing in and then deciding from there, do you want to continue to invest in them? Um, but yeah, 13 is I mean, I watched it again for like the third time this weekend, and I still was just blown away, honestly. Not in a good way, but can we also do some research on the color of law? Absolutely. Now, what I do want to say is that I was very particular in some of the literature that I recommended for you guys to read because I wanted it from the standpoint of a person of color, okay? And specifically Black authors, because I think that it's very important to add that lived experience to the facts, right? And so there are only, I think, two books that I recommended on the syllabus that are not written by Black authors or authors of color. Of course, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg one, because it's in her own words. And then also the Nine is also not, but I wanted you guys to read those two books because I think it does give a good idea on the mind of Supreme Court justices, and the reality of this situation is that most of them are not Black. Okay, but the rest of the books are all written by Black people, many by Black women, because I think the lived experience um, adds additional context to it. And it takes it out of just like being a science and makes it a real life thing. So that is part of the reason why the color of law was not included on your suggested reading. However, it is good reading. I think it gives additional background and information as well that would only benefit you guys if you have the time to read it. But that was specifically the reason why I did not really utilize it for this particular class. No, the Dred Scott case was specifically the 13th Amendment. Um, that was specifically the 13th Amendment that came out of the overturning of the Dred Scott case. Um, and the 13th Amendment is really important because, again, he was suing for his freedom, right? So there was an understanding in Missouri at the time that if you had gone to a free state, right? Because remember, at this point, the country is very divided. You have the North. The North is where the anti slavery Republicans, because remember, at that time, the political parties weren't framed the way that we know them to be framed now. The Republicans, I think, would be closer to what we would consider the modern day Democratic Party. And then the Democrats were considered what we would think of as the modern day Republican Party. They were mostly slave owning Southern slave masters. And so the North was becoming more industrialized, shying away from agriculture. They didn't really need, the bodies in the field. And so that's why the North is credited with being safer. That's where Black people would go and reside and get their 40 acres and a mule and all of that. And then the Southern states were still very much slave owning, right? Three-fifths compromise. We want our voting strength, but we want our slaves to grow and maintain our crops. So Dred Scott was a slave who was owned by a U.S. Army surgeon who moved through two or three different states, two of which, Wisconsin and Illinois, were free states. And so when Dr. Emerson died, Dred Scott at the time was living in Missouri. Missouri had this doctrine called once free, always free, meaning that if you were a slave that had been freed in a free state, if you moved to Missouri, Missouri would honor the fact that you had been freed in another state, right? And so that's what happened when Dr. Emerson died. Dred Scott sued for his freedom, for his and his wife's freedom. And initially, he didn't sue. He went to Dr. Emerson's widow and asked her if she would free them, and she said no. So that's when he sued. Missouri initially agreed with him, but that was overturned because of all of the political pressure. By political pressure, I mean white slave owners were not happy with the decision. They still wanted to maintain slavery in the state of Missouri. And so what ended up happening, right, was it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically said, that Dred Scott could never be considered a free man because he was a slave, that the Congress did not have the power to abolish slavery anywhere. And there was a very infamous line that came from the Dred Scott decision, where the Chief Justice at the time made the statement that the Black man has no rights of which the white man is bound to respect. So it is considered the worst Supreme Court decision in US history, because it is such a harsh and like unfathomable decision, right? To say that someone just on the basis of their skin color has no rights, that should be acknowledged, protected, or even recognized by a white man, and never would, right? So it's pretty bad. It's a pretty bad decision. Um, and it's the decision that is credited with the start of the Civil War. Now, I want to make it clear that Abraham Lincoln is credited for freeing the slaves, but Abraham Lincoln also did not believe that Black people were equal to white people. Um, so the fight over slavery and the Civil War has always been framed as a fight over slavery being wrong, but it's not. It was a fight over the economic impact of slavery, the governmental impact of slavery. Power is more so what that argument was, and less the morality of whether or not we should be doing this to actual human beings. Okay, so I think that um, that is something that I want to dispel. Okay, Abraham Lincoln, while yes, he didn't believe Black people should be slaves, he also did not believe Black people should be equals either. Okay, um, thank you for the Emancipation Proclamation, but but he did not think we should be equals either. Um, but yeah, the Dred Scott decision is often credited as being the start of the Civil War because the North was so like baffled and angered by the decision. Not only that, because what ended up happening before this is that something called the Missouri Compromise happened. This is linked back to week one when we talk about the Haitian Revolution and us acquiring Louisiana. So remember, I was talking about now we have this huge chunk of land and we need to decide who's going to own what, right? And is slavery going to move westward, or are we just going to keep things status quo? Well, the Missouri Compromise, what happened there is that when the colony of Missouri was being created, the agreement between the existing colonies was that Missouri would come in as a slave state. Okay. And so remember, these states are fighting for political control. Similarly to what we see now, our House of Representatives, the amount of representatives is based on the population of a state. And then the Senate, everyone gets equal. You get, however many senators, 2 senators, I believe, per state, right? This is the reason why the control of the House of Representatives is extremely important, because most bills start and stop there. So the way that the government was structured at the time, the North wouldn't want the South to have all of these slaves counted in their population, because that means more representation for them in Congress. Vice versa, right? If I'm in the South and we have 300,000 slaves in my state and only 100,000 slave owners, then my population is dumbed down from 400,000 in total to only 100,000. That means I have less control. Okay. So this is where all this is coming from. Again, we're not arguing about the morality of slavery. We're not arguing about whether or not it's right or wrong to treat people this way. We're arguing about whether or not those extra bodies should count towards economics and politics. Not very united, right? We're not the United States. Everyone is kind of functioning with their own individual goals. But back to the Missouri Compromise. So that was the compromise, that Missouri would come in as a slave state. And then that's what created what we know as the Mason-Dixon line. The Mason-Dixon line was the boundary. Okay, so everything north of that line was free. Everything south of that line was slave. All right. But Missouri, even though it came in as a slave state, It had its own doctrine known as the once free, always free doctrine, to where if a enslaved person moved for any period of time to a free state and they were freed, Missouri would honor that should they come back to Missouri. What the Dred Scott decision said is that that compromise was illegal. Basically, the justices said that Congress never had the authority to create this boundary line and say, hey, you states up here, you're free. You states down here, you're slave states. If anybody wanted to have slaves, they would have slaves because Black people are not people for us to even be having these arguments about. Yeah. So when we talk about the overturning of the Dred Scott case and what that means, we're talking about what does it mean to be a citizen, right? This is also the reason why I wanted to teach the class the way I wanted to teach it. What we're seeing right now, we're arguing about immigration, right? Who gets to stay? Who gets to leave? That started with Black people. Anytime you say Dred Scott, I think of the book, The House of Dystry. Yeah. Exactly. I'm paying close attention to how they try and attack the 14th Amendment. That's what I'm saying, right? The fact that you had Donald Trump in an interview or in a press conference talk about how the 14th Amendment was only created to give citizenship to Black people and it was never meant to extend outside of that tells you the impact that race relations and Black people's fight for equality and freedom in this country have had on all facets of America. Okay. If it had not been for the struggles of Dred Scott, if it had not been for the advocacy of Frederick Douglass, if it had not been for the Civil War, that a lot of Black people fought on both sides. Okay. You had enslaved Blacks who had to fight for the Confederacy. Crazy. Even though the Union was coming to try to free them. Black people have carried this country on their backs for generations. And you cannot separate how the law and the Constitution and all of that is framed from Black people. Because we were the very basis for why all of these laws and amendments and all that were created. The 13th Amendment, okay, the 14th Amendment, when we talk about what citizenship means and who is protected and equal protection, that comes from that. Okay, the 15th Amendment, which gave Black men the right to vote. All of these things come from the struggles of Black American people. And so when we even talk about race relations in the sense of the amount of Hispanic and Latino voters who voted against their self-interest, right? And we try to dig and ask, like, why would you do that? It's because they don't understand that the very rights that they enjoy came on the backs of enslaved Black American people. Because this history is not taught. We just hear amendments and we don't think about the greater story behind how they were even created, right? So Dred Scott, although a horrible decision, it was a huge decision that really framed how we think about citizenship. It has been the talk and the consideration of immigration reform, immigration policy, immigration laws, and again, who gets to be considered a citizen. When we think about Guantanamo Bay and the controversy around political prisoners and how they're treated, right? Do those people get protections under the Constitution? If you're an illegal immigrant, right, and you get arrested, do you still have a right to Miranda rights? Do you still have a right against illegal search and seizure? Do you still have a right against cruel and unusual punishment? Because technically you're not a citizen, okay? And then if you watch 13th, you'll also realize how the prison industrial complex has disenfranchised so many citizens because it takes away your right to vote. And only your state can decide whether or not you get it back. There are only certain states that allow convicted criminals to get their right to vote back. Okay, So when we think about, we think about gerrymandering, we think about voter suppression laws, we think about voter ID laws, but we don't think about the disenfranchisement of Black men and women who end up in the system. And when they come out, they no longer have the right to vote. That is an essential part of citizenship in the United States. The idea that the United States started from the concept of taxation without representation is tyranny. The Americans wanted the ability to have representation in parliament, right? So that they weren't paying more taxes because they were far away. The entire idea of citizenship and why a lot of people get citizenship is so that they can vote, so that their voices can be heard. And then you take that away from them and you never give it back. Are they even a citizen anymore? Right? So yeah, Dred Scott was one decision, and it looks like it's one dimensional, but it had so many different moving parts. And we're still arguing about a lot of those principles and concepts to this day. Okay, so we're going to do a deep dive of that tomorrow. And then we'll talk about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments as well before we move into the civil rights cases. So 2 weeks in El Paso. Yeah. Immigration is not as simple as I think the media tries to make it out to be. Yeah, it's not as simple. It has created even a new type of part of the law called crimmigration, where there's this intersection between your immigration status and criminal law. The fact that people can go to court, right? Like if you maybe get like a criminal traffic infraction, you can go to court because you have to have your day in court, and then ICE could be standing right outside and pick you up, and nobody knows where you went, right? Because they're not law enforcement; they're a part of an executive agency without the level of oversight that a lot of law enforcement agencies have. Should they be able to do that? Things up while listening. Oh, awesome. Good. Takes years. Yes, it takes years. I think it's unnecessarily long. It's very burdensome. It's very expensive. That is not to say that I don't think that there is an immigration issue in this country. There is. But we do need to think about immigration reform because immigrants don't get much from the country, but they give a lot to the country. So we have to consider that. Thanks to Frederick Douglass, too, for arguing for the troops to have the right to vote. Absolutely. Frederick Douglass did a lot of advocacy for the rights and equality of Black people. And in fact, Frederick Douglass was one of the Black advocates that Abraham Lincoln invited to the White House to basically say, hey, I understand what you guys are trying to do, and I agree. Y'all should not be slaves, but you're also not my equal. Yeah. So he went through a lot, and that's why I am of a firm belief that our ancestors did so much with less than what we have today. So we can't just lay down and take things for how they are. People have fought and bled and died for us to achieve a certain level of progress, and we haven't gotten there yet. But we can't allow what's happening to just continue to happen. We have a lot more power than we realize that we do, and I want us to really learn what those powers are so we can tap into them and use them. Yes, that was a problem with the death of George Floyd in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco. Kakif, what problem are you touching on? I'm so grateful for these lessons. Yes. Thank you, Tan. Knowledge is truly powerful. Thank you. You're very welcome, you guys. We're starting to see even news media get censored. As you guys noted in the early days of class, the page on, I think, whitehouse.gov that used to have the Constitution isn't there anymore. There's definitely trying to be a control the narrative. There's also a content creator that does data analytics, and he's been doing a lot of data analytics on this last voting cycle with the presidential election, and he noted that there was an increase in Black male voters voting for Donald Trump. And he went even further to look at the demographics. And what he was able to see was that those individuals, those Black Americans who voted for Trump, there was a higher correlation of those that did not understand Black history and their likelihood to vote for Donald Trump. And this is a big reason why I am presenting this knowledge and giving this to you guys. Not necessarily because I think that any one candidate was a perfect candidate, right? Not because I'm advocating for any one party, but I do want to make it clear that the Republican Party of current day, X-nay, like, can't do it. But um, what it is to say is that our knowledge really is powerful, and your knowledge or lack thereof is absolutely going to influence how you give your power away. Okay. Um, so the fact that there was a higher correlation of Black Americans who did not know Black history and them voting for Trump says a lot, because then that means I could tell you anything and you're going to believe it. And that's problematic. We cannot allow people to rewrite history. We cannot allow people to give us this narrative that we are in a post-racial society. There's no such thing until people start to acknowledge their racism and address it for what it is. We will never get to a post-racial society. And race and race relations are way too embedded in the fabric of this country for us to not acknowledge it. That's why I'm teaching this class. And that's why I'm doing an emphasis on the impact of Black Americans on the nation of the United States of America, because you cannot separate the two. Black Lives Matter people were being kidnapped and not told why, because it was not actually police. Yeah, yes. There's definitely, even when you look like outside of the actual Black Lives Matter movement, when we think about some of those cases that were being prosecuted, the disappearing of key witnesses. That's all I'm gonna say. Absolutely agree with you. How you agree with how you give your power if we don't educate? Absolutely, absolutely. I'm a firm believer too in taking a step back from the mainstream media. I really feel like most news networks, including the CNNs and the MSNBCs and all of that, have an agenda that they're pushing, right? There's no truly unbiased news anymore. There is an agenda that's being supported on both sides. And so we really have to be careful where we're ingesting our information from. And honestly, we need to be continuously questioning and researching things for ourselves. Okay. It's really, really important. Again, once you control the narrative, you can control the people. Can you recap classes for tomorrow? Okay, so it will be a two-part lecture. The first part will drop tomorrow on the Dred Scott decision. We will only talk about that in that video. And then the second part will be the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments and the Reconstruction era and how it shaped what we now know as the Civil Rights era. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Black codes, Jim Crow laws, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, and all of that as a direct effect of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments coming into play. So those are the classes for tomorrow. On Thursday, we will review the Supreme Court cases that shaped the Civil Rights era. So we're talking about Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education, and then what we know as the Civil Rights era, of course, marked with Martin Luther King, the Montgomery bus boycotts, and things of that nature. Okay, what I don't know about. Yes. What trial was that? I cannot remember, and this is so sad because it's been so many of them that you can't even keep up. It was right around the time of, no, it was before Breonna Taylor. It was a guy who got shot in his apartment by a white female officer who thought that it was her apartment that he had broken into. Botham Jean, that's what it was. I believe that that was the case where a key witness had been found shot and killed with their tongue cut out of their mouth. Yeah. Um, that happens quite frequently. Or we can even see in the Trayvon Martin trial, his friend who was on the phone with him when he was approached by George Zimmerman, how she was treated and considered illiterate. Now, she didn't go missing, but she was vilified in the media and portrayed as this unreliable witness. So we see a lot of witness tampering, witness intimidation, and even witnesses disappearing when we have these big cases like this, right? I think it's modern day, um, it's witness intimidation, and we all should be very concerned. I have my daughter who is 16. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Yes, I am a mother myself, and what I realized, especially after this past election cycle, is that it's really going to be my responsibility to teach my child Black history because it's being vilified. Even the way we see DEI being discussed, of course, woke became this bad term. It's all really propaganda to push an agenda, um, and they're not teaching a lot of these things in school. I would say that I'm just grateful that I went to a historically Black college. I went to a historically Black law school that taught me a lot of this. And I'm very passionate about sharing all of this knowledge with you guys as well. Okay. Good night. I will see you in class. Um, I am really enjoying the discussions that we're having under the videos as well. I think it's really important for us to discuss these things and kind of flesh these things out to get a better understanding as well. I love the questions that you guys are asking. I do take the time to kind of research and figure things out for you guys as well. But I'm loving a lot of the engagement that I'm seeing on the videos. And I'm loving a lot of the feedback that I'm getting as well. It helps me to frame the information for you because I'm afraid for my 24-year-old son. It's rough. It's a rough time right now. I think we just all have to arm ourselves as much as we can with knowledge. Obviously, do not allow them to scare you into apathy and make you think that there's nothing that you can do. I think it's time for us to really hold our elected officials' feet to the fire, but protect ourselves as much as possible. I'm grateful for my HBC. Me too. Me too. And what I've loved to see is the increase in graduating seniors that have been applying to HBCUs, especially since 2020. I think George Floyd really kind of kickstarted a lot of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if, with the rollbacks of DEIs and the end of affirmative action in college admissions, we will continue to see an uptick in Black students who want to be taught at HBCUs. I think it's great, and I think it's much needed. I try to see if I can find some kids resources. A lot of these books that we read are done from an adult perspective, but I think the best way is for us to educate ourselves and then retell them the stories. It's Black History Month. If you can find a Black-owned bookstore, Black-owned restaurants, take them to these places and teach them the importance of Black economics and Black culture. I think meeting them where they are when it comes to, like, if they like hip hop and stuff like that. Hip hop is Black culture, right? And hip hop was created as protest music initially. So exposing it age appropriately with them as well, but educating yourself first and then relaying these stories back to them. These are how the slaves were able to keep their history as well. It's just through folklore and storytelling until they were able to read and write and put it in book form. What was the name of the site? Open Secrets is the name of the site. Yeah, oh my God, Philando Castile was horrible. I in the middle of COVID too, I was going to protests and stuff as well for George Floyd. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, guys, it is 10 o'clock. I have enjoyed my time here with you guys. Thank you guys for the questions. I hope that it gave you a greater understanding of the material from last week. Again, tomorrow I'm going to be dropping a two-part lesson on both the Dred Scott decision and on the impact of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments during the Reconstruction era. So look out for those. Um, Next week, I swear, I promise y'all, I'm gonna have the live figured out. So I'll be able to live stream to both TikTok and YouTube under one setting. YouTube is just killing my vibe for real. But if I'm being shadow banned or you're not seeing my content, please feel free to go to the link tree in my bio and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you never miss when I post a video or when I go live. Um, and then, yeah, office hours will be every Monday from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay. And then just be on the lookout for the videos. If you miss a video, they'll always be included on the playlist on my TikTok under Race and Rights for Hillman Talk. So you don't have to worry about missing anything. Okay. Until I see you guys next time, be safe, continue to engage on the videos, and I will talk to you guys next week.